I've been with IMG for 21 years. And specifically within action sports. So I've seen the action sports industry really grow, and working with other colleagues within the industry like Amy and Tim Reed at ESPN for X Games. We were there at the ground level together. So that's one of my key highlights, is really locking arms and creating and growing the action sports industry. Again, World Surf League, my entire career has been working with the World Surf League. But specifically, I'm going to tout Caitlin Banchero. She was working with me at the time when we launched Street League Skateboarding. So she's been able to kind of push that property along into the Olympics and usher that in. So those are three key, highlights for me. So again, I've got a long storied career in action sports. I've been around for a while.
Thank you, Jennifer. I appreciate you. And, I've been chasing after you for a little bit, so I'm just excited to be able to have you on board here, too, because I know you bring a lot to the table. Absolutely. All right, who wants to chime in next?
I'll be happy to go next. Hi, I'm Emily Hofer. I'm the Chief People Officer and Head of Social Impact and Sustainability at the WSL, World Surf League. Jennifer Lau, I'm very aware of the partnership the WSL has had with IMG for years, and thank you and your team for awesome work, particularly with Vans US Open every year in Huntington Beach. I would say, my career is in human resources, and in the last 4 years, I have joined the sports and entertainment field and the media field, and it's been an amazing adventure. I would say the key thing that I think I'm most proud of is I'm part of the leadership team that included equal prize money for women, for the first global sports league in the world to offer equal prize money for our female athletes, which is a huge moment for world sports, global sports, and also for our league. So with that, I'll let someone else go.
Thank you, Emily. And I apologize for butchering your name. So it's Hofer and not Hofer. So, okay, my apologies for that. All right, so who wants to chime in next?
I can go next. Good morning, everyone. My name is Nancy Atafunwa, Director of Marketing for USA Water Polo. My team oversees the brand of USA Water Polo, our partnership marketers, our athlete marketing, merchandise, and community engagement. I've been within the Olympic and Paralympic movement for about 10 years now. So more recently on the NGB side, which are national governing bodies. But prior to that, more on the agency and brand side. And if I had to pick one moment, was the creation of a category with the USOPC for DeVry Education Group. Athletes, it's very hard for athletes, Olympic and Paralympic athletes, to graduate within a 4 years time. So the partnership with DeVry University allowed our athletes, our Olympic and Paralympic athletes, to continue to train, continue to compete while gaining an education. So once they retired from their sport, they could start life after sport pretty prepared and readily. So that's something I'm most proud of.
That's very cool, Nancy. And definitely kudos to you for creating that as well. All right.
Yeah.
Certainly. Okay, so then there were two.
I'll jump in. Yeah, thank you so much for having me. It's such a pleasure to be here and kind of see the next generation. As Jen said, it happened so fast. It was so incredible to start my career kind of doing international events with her and really expand the surf and lifestyle genre, and then get to the opportunity, as she mentioned, to really build Street League Skateboarding from the ground up, which is, I've spent the last 10 years building the preeminent professional league within skateboarding, and more recently that was essentially utilized by the IOC as kind of the rules of the game as they bring skateboarding onto the program. So I think the highlights have been so many, so hard to pick from. I think a day like today is a highlight, as a number of the panelists have already mentioned, really seeing the interconnectedness of the sports and specifically the action sports world, and really all of our businesses' desires to build these opportunities for more athletes to do more, and how it's really all interconnected. Definitely expanding the league internationally and adding the women's division, which was equal opportunity at the beginning as well, have been highlights. So it's all really exciting and happy to be here.
Very cool, Caitlin. And I'm happy that our event can actually be considered, you know, one of the highlights of your career. All right. So I think we have Amy and Lori.
I'll go ahead next, Ron, if that's okay.
Yeah.
Hi, good morning. Good morning, everybody. Okay, first of all, fangirling at this panel, right? When Jeff says that someone is always watching, let me tell you that these women on this panel, I've been watching for years. I'm a lot older, I think, than most of you, but what an accomplished slate of women in the sports industry. And that's a highlight for sure. You know, but so in my career, I kind of jokingly, I've got my elevator pitch down pretty well. I've had every job in the world of volleyball and beach volleyball, international, domestic, literally every job, from making the balls to running a tour to working for sponsors. So my view sometimes, you know, some people call it well-rounded. I like to call it pessimistic. Like I've actually seen my industry from almost every different angle. You know, I mean, I've actually, you know, been a volunteer and you know, gotten down and dirty in Olympic and Paralympic events. And to be honest with you, that has been probably one of the more rewarding aspects of my career in sports, is actually getting to see things unfold. You know, Jennifer talks about action sports. Well, my God, they created action sports practically at IMG. I mean, that was the creation, right? They were doing events on such a large scale far before anybody else was. And so when you would go to one of their events and you soak in what's happening, whether you're there as a spectator, sponsor, or a volunteer, you know, that gives you some unique perspective, right? So for me, I've been kind of tootling around the world, and I guess, you know, a highlight for me has actually been that same aspect, is I've gotten to see things from the inside, from the outside, you know, from up at the 30,000 foot level and from down, literally digging the mud out and the sand. And, you know, to give a word of encouragement, my career actually began off of a failure. You know, I was thrown into the world of pro beach volleyball, and it was an absolute disaster. Everything you could think of to go wrong in an event went wrong, and there happened to be somebody watching and noticed that I didn't lose my mind and I didn't run away from the site, and offered me a job that kickstarted my whole career in the rest of the industry of my sport. So thanks to everybody for including me on this panel, and also I'm really looking forward to hearing what everybody has to say. It's a great group.
Very nice, Lori. Thank you for sharing. All right. Last but not least, Amy.
Hi, sorry about that. I think I was muted before. I firstly, Ron, thanks for having us. And I agree with Lori. I don't know if you purposefully put together an all-female panel, but I was really happy when I saw the lineup. And I had known some of you, Jen, obviously for a long time. I like to stay, we started when we were 5 years old, which is why we've been in the industry so long. But really just happy to be here, and thank you for the opportunity. I actually started as an intern on the first, what was known as the Extreme Games in 1995. And I was a senior at Providence College, and you know, we had the first two events in Newport and Providence, Rhode Island, and just to have been a part of this for the last 25 years has been exceptional. And a few highlights for me is, you know, we were known as the Olympics of action sports, and so when the Salt Lake Games decided to include snowboarding, we said, "Wow, we've had snowboarding since 1997, and now here these sports are recognized by the Olympics." And I think we were all very excited to see, you know, Tokyo with skateboarding, but I know it'll come eventually. And then the second highlight is I got to launch a program called Shred Hate, which was a bullying prevention program that the X Games has been running. And we reached 90,000 students in classrooms, and it was awesome to have an opportunity to do something good with the brand. So thank you so much.
Okay, great. Well, and one of the things too that I meant to say, and Caitlin just really got me thinking about too, is that connectedness that you get in panels. And it's always really cool when I have panels and folks know each other, and it just brings a different vibe to the panel. So definitely excited about that. All right, so next, you know, I wanted to ask you if you could just really shed some light on just some of the various job roles and functions within the action sports and Olympic sports arena. You obviously have all shared, you know, some parts of your career, but is there anything that we're missing, anything else that you want to share with the students in terms of opportunities within action and Olympic sports? Yeah, Lori, yes.
Sure, Ron. Yeah. So one thing I wanted to highlight to the students that are participating today is that you know, don't close yourself off to thinking that a career in action sports or the Olympics or even the Paralympics means that you have to actually work for the Olympics or the Paralympics or, you know, an action sports event. You know, I can tell you from firsthand experience that there are lots of opportunities outside of the traditional, you know, sports corporations or sports entities that you can have a huge influence on. If you're a sports fan, or if you can advocate for sports or athletes, working for a private corporation or a potential sponsor, or a services industry like finance or banking or telecommunications, you can actually take sport with you, you know, to those opportunities and still have an impact, you know, on being, you know, again, being a sponsor is a great way. I learned a lot the days that I worked for a company that was a big sponsor of not only the Olympics and Paralympics, but of more grassroots, you know, efforts. And you can learn a lot in those roles, especially early on in your career, where you're trying to just sort of get your feet wet, but you can also contribute a lot, you know, in a different way, still a meaningful way, but in a different way. So don't close yourself off to those types of opportunities just because it's not directly with the Olympic Games or with an organizing committee, or, you know, or something that is the stereotype. I have to work for the Olympics if I want to work in the world of Olympic sports. Not true, right? And I think all of us on this panel are proof, you know, of that. You can have a big influence outside of that Olympic arena.
Very cool. Thank you, Lori. Anybody else want to chime in on that?
Yeah,
Oh, go ahead, Nancy.
Oh, thank you, Emily. I totally agree with Lori. I think to a colleague who shared a story with me a couple of months ago about how she reached her role within the Olympic and Paralympic movement, and she saw a job posting 8 years before she got this job and said, "This is my dream job." And she went through that job posting and the skill sets required. And she was like, I'm going to get experience in all of these points so that when that role becomes available again, I'm prepared to apply. So for that role, she had to go into government relations, political affairs, lobbying, security, logistics. A lot of these roles that she took were not sports, fully steeped in the sports, but sport adjacent, so that when this role came up, she was fully prepared and she got it. So it was 8 years in the making for her. And I think that's just super neat to figure out what it is you want to do and kind of have this journey and pipeline towards that goal.
Thank you, Nancy.
I'll add to both of those really wonderful points by saying I think there's a real nimbleness with action sports that is maybe a little bit harder to find with more of the kind of established Big Four, that really offers an opportunity for, you know, young talent to try their hand at a lot of different things. You know, early on in my career, I was writing contracts for broadcast partners, you know, formulating the rules of the game, really working with the athletes and their support groups to understand what they needed. I mean, I was just really an opportunity, the partnerships that Lori mentioned, and really partnerships, especially for our category, help build, you know, the actual fundamentals and foundation of the league in a real way. And so I think just there's if you're, you know, Jeff said earlier, taking pride in what you do and really kind of getting involved at a deeper level, you have the opportunity to affect a lot of different things that might not be what you think when you first hear of a job title or a different category. But it becomes really exciting very quickly.
I think that's
nice.
Great what Caitlin said, and I'd like to add to that as well. And it's, you know, not being afraid to try something you don't know. I mean, I saw an internship for ESPN. I had never even known what a 1080 was when I started with the X Games. And I think learning, you know, being able to adapt to new things and trying something that you've never even done before is really gives you an opportunity to seek places you wouldn't normally find.
And again, I think we're all echoing the same sentiment. It's just, it's being open. And as Jeff alluded to earlier, if you've got the passion and the drive to really put yourself forward, you know, that is the background, I think, within action sports in itself. We weren't the Big Four, as Caitlin said, you know, and I work at IMG. So if most people that are familiar with IMG as a company, it is stick and ball traditional team sports. And here I am in action sports, you know, we had to grow and prove ourselves. So the ability to get in, I afforded, anyone that works with me, I work for an intern as much, I'm accountable to an intern as much as to a coordinator as I am to our CEO. And because of that fact, Action Sports has been able to, or the Action Sports events that I've been able to create, foster that opportunity for everyone to have a voice. And so, as Lori mentioned, I was also the same way. I'm picking up trash. I'm hauling 20-pound bags of ice, but at the same time, I'm shaking hands with the next CMO of Procter & Gamble about a potential sponsorship. We just have to be nimble. And again, I think the broader sort of overarching theme in my mind, and when I do interview candidates for certain roles within my events or within my organization, if you want to work in sports, you've got to be able to don't shun away any opportunity to get your foot in, because for the right company and the right opportunity will come. You'll have a voice, you'll be able to collaborate. And at that moment, there's not one job out there that you can't have. I think that's really what it is. I mean, there might be other jobs if you want to be a cardiac surgeon. Might take you a little bit longer to get there, for me, probably. But like, if there's an interest, I think to that point, just jump at it. And at the end of the day, those skill sets will be transferable. They can go with you and move with you from any other business vertical, sport vertical, et cetera.
And that inventiveness, that finding a way to get it done no matter what the circumstances are, which I think we've all had events that Lori was talking about, where you just it's an event. Things always go wrong, and just finding that way to make it work and get it done. I think that's not only by necessity for these categories, but also really inherent to kind of the characteristics and qualities of these categories. And I think it's also just kind of bringing the theme of the panel together. It's also why, there's some really interesting opportunities with the Olympics looking towards these categories, because they are inventive and really, progressing and changing and dynamic in those ways. So I think it lends itself to a lot of those things that make a job at any level really exciting and certainly not fitting one mold.
Yeah, I would add that I think a lot of times in sports, you think you have to be able to play the sport really well in order to work in the field. And I can tell you I'm not a surfer, but I do have a lot of curiosity about surfing. I have learned I have to consume all the content we produce or anyone else produces. And that curiosity has served me well. And I would offer it to anyone who's seeking a career in any sport, whether or not you play it, you need to become a master of the content. And that curiosity is going to serve you well in any sort of beginning position. As the panelists have pointed out, my first job in HR, I was a secretary. I graduated from school, but I was a secretary to a VP of HR, and I got her coffee and I ran out and got her lunches. But I learned so much and I was curious, and that just opened doors for me. So I would offer that curiosity and willingness to just master your field at every point that you're growing in your career. Like, I'm still growing and I'm still learning. That has served me really well.
Very good stuff. Yeah, look, Jennifer, go ahead. Jennifer, you're me.
Just something to add on what Emily said. That is something that I've said to, whether it is undergraduate students or master's students that are looking, that I've interviewed or I've been, doing informational interviews with, or just have bumped into in regular conversation. Again, entry-level positions, especially, and I've said this time and time again, Emily, you're a perfect example. Like you said, you graduated from college, you were an assistant. Imagine you want to work for Nike. And imagine, Mark Parker, back in the day when he was still there, imagine being his executive assistant. It's such a ground level opportunity to really get into the business of the brand or the business of the sport. And when you're not sure where you want to go, again, it's being curious and it's really soaking up as much information as you can. Imagine when you do identify certain areas of a business or within sport that you're really gravitating towards, you now have a true understanding as to the overall function of the company to be able to navigate your way through the sport, the league, the company in itself. And I think that's something to be, that's something to really, really, focus on, because it's, again, internships, coordinator, manager. There's really various levels. It's just really about the opportunity that you're going to seek, I think, and how much you put in it. And for me, I think just to kind of expand on that theme that Caitlin said earlier, action sports, like I said, is new. It's still considered new. For all of you that are sitting here, listening to us on this panel, I'm looking to you. Again, 20 plus years in the industry. And as Amy said, yes, I was 5 when I started. But yes, I might have some experience, but just know me as a person and the head of action sports and working in it, to Emily's point, I surf okay. I don't surf well, but trends, what's happening, our demographic is really where I'm looking to our college students, who's just graduating, coming in. And that is the difference, I think, with action sports. This is your space, which naturally transcends now, which is why skateboarding and surfing, adventure climbing, as well as breakdancing now in Paris 2024, the Olympics is looking for sports that are now different from where I grew up first watching, whether it is triathlon, whether it is, gymnastics. So this is the new sport, and you're really starting to see the Olympics contemporize. That's the cross section between action sports and Olympics. And that's where I see a lot of you students that are participating in this conference and listening to us on this panel. I'm going to look to you. You're our next superstars. This is the sports marketing, next generation. And so I'm going to lean on you and your generation more than me being in my 40s, trying to figure out how to navigate.
I think that's such an excellent point. I was thinking that as you evaluate opportunities for you in your future career, make sure that you're evaluating places that are going to listen and that have an interest in your lens, because I think, as Jennifer just pointed out, our sports space is all about a very young demographic. And we need the lens that each of you will bring in order to keep us contemporary, to keep us on trend, to keep us relevant. And so make sure that you're thinking about, as you interview your potential employers, are they going to really, take my point of view into account? Because it is so important that the younger talent are shaping our strategy.
You guys have put such great stuff out there, and I just almost want to sit back and just have at it. Just keep sharing. Very awesome information. And Jen, I'm just trying to wrap my head around the fact that breakdancing is going to be a Olympic sport. I remember back in the 80s when it first started, and just imagine that years later, that's be Olympic sports. It's a sort of a mind blower. For our next question, and so I heard curiosity a number of times, I heard being nimble a number of times. And so what other characteristics or skills that you may not have already shared do you think are essential for success, whether it be in action sports, Olympic sports, or just sports in general?
I think it's passion. I think we've all, in a roundabout way, said that, but I always say you can't teach passion. I mean, what it boils down to is hard work and passion. That's what all of my colleagues here on the panel have done for the last, their entire careers. And if you're not passionate about something, like most of us have been saying, it's not going to work. So I think that's a big one for me.
I think, Ron, tolerance too. We talk about being nimble, we talk about being curious, but in the world of Olympic sports and action sports, I think more than any other, you find a lot of globalism. You find a lot of international colleagues and competitors and places to stage events. And one of the I think I don't want to go so far as to call it a mistake, but I think one of the areas that can set a person back is when you are working in our world of action, especially in Olympics, and you walk into a situation and you assume that everything's going to be exactly like it is in your neck of the woods, right? And you don't anticipate that you need to speak slower or learn another language or understand the work cultures. Just really quickly, for me, my setback with I went to work an event pretty early on in my career, and I've been at this for almost 31 years now, and pretty early in my career, I went to work an event in Italy, and at 2 o'clock on the nose, everybody disappeared. I'm like, what the heck is going on? Like, where did all the guys, the bleachers aren't done, the flags aren't put up. It's like, oh, it's pasta break. you know, it's like, okay, note to self, you know, don't schedule any more work between 2 and 3, you know, it's pasta break, right? Or talking to a room, you know, you're lucky. I mean, volunteers are always something hard to come by, you know, for any event. And you're lucky if you get a small handful. We'd be talking to maybe a small handful of less than a dozen volunteers at a pro beach volleyball event in the United States, but then I'd have 500 volunteers in a room in Japan, and none of them can understand, you know, what I was saying. So you have to be tolerant and patient of the situation that you're going to find yourself in, because action sports and Olympic sports, unlike, you know, NFL or NBA, I mean, there's an attraction to those big sports from a fan perspective, and now they're finally catching up with action sports in terms of staging events overseas. But in our world, you know, surfing, skateboarding, volleyball, beach volleyball, water polo, hugely successful over, you know, outside of the United States. So be tolerant, be patient, understand that you're working in cultures that, you know, that are different from what we have here in the United States.
Very cool, Lori. And I love that, you know, tolerance and of course, patience as well. Good stuff. Who else wants to check?
Yeah, I was
Yes,
just gonna say, I completely agree with Lori, and that's what I was going to say. You have to have an interest in people and culture for these types of roles. They're so international. You know, one of my previous roles, I worked at IMG in their Olympic and Paralympic practice, and you know, my teammates were in Brazil, my teammates were in Russia, my teammates were in the UK. My teammates were in a different city. You know, even within the US, there's different cultures. So of how business is executed. So it was very important for me to be interested in my teammates so that we could collaborate together and execute against a goal. I would also say in the Olympics and Paralympic space, you know, the games are every 2 years. There's a games every 2 years if you do winter and summer, or every 4 years if you're single winter or single summer. And you have to have a long vision to get to, right? It's not, the Super Bowl's every year, so they're executing against an annual event, which is great and also hard, but you have to sustain and maintain an interest of every stakeholder or every person whose attention you're trying to capture for 4 years. And so like that long vision thinking is important. You know, when I look to hire, I look for someone who is both strategic and creative, because you need a little bit of both to execute in the work that we do. So I think those things are important. The interest, in the international. We also have to know what's going on politically internationally, right? So for Sochi Olympic Games, Olympic and Paralympic Games, there's a lot of things going on in Russia, and you know, I have to understand what's going on there so that me and my team or my clients understand what we're walking into.
Great stuff, Nancy. So I love that. So having an interest in people, and it sounds so basic, but yeah, interest in people and having a long-term vision, which is so hard. And I just love what you're sharing about keeping that attention over the span of 4 years, which I imagine could be just incredibly challenging. So thank you for sharing that. Good stuff.
I would add, which is kind of a build on a lot of these things, like a real reverence and respect for the people and the culture. And I think, you know, that's, you know, easy to understand on a lot of planes, but it's also really necessary when you're designing something that, you know, is going to be adopted by people from this culture who believe in it very passionately and are sometimes kind of misunderstood or feel like it's theirs and now it's growing much larger. So you want to make sure that it's really being built properly with their needs and the real kind of impetus of the sport and culture and people in mind. And also really important because you're bringing together so many different groups with so many different agendas. With varying levels of understanding of that culture and those people. So it's a real kind of need to really sit and listen, understand people, where they're coming from, what they want, what they need, what they're capable of, and kind of finding those solutions that bring those things together, knowing what can compromise and what can't. And I think that's like especially relevant as we kind of bring action sports and Olympics together, because you don't ultimately want to take a product that's inherently powerful for a lot of intangible reasons and turn it into something else where it kind of loses, you know, that X factor accidentally. So I think those things, and that's also kind of connected to that vision, that open-mindedness, that, you know, seeing what can be, not just what is, and finding solution.
Thank you, Caitlin. I'm hearing so much about really focus on having strong people skills, but also cultural awareness and coming back to that, just being open, being nimble too. So those are things we're constantly hearing. Great. Anybody else want to weigh in on that question?
I think the last thing I'd add is a desire to win. And that seems kind of natural because we're in sports, but that desire to win is going to keep you going even when, you know, there's hurdles along the way. You know, through COVID, I'm sure all of us can nod and say, well, COVID's been tough on sports. And at this moment, we're waiting on one of our last COVID tests to send over 150 people on a private plane to Australia to kick off our tour for the balance of 2021. So, you know, having a desire to win, having the ability to just, you know, take a hit and keep going is really important.
Great stuff. All right, so I wanted to move on. I wanted to take a couple questions from our students, and then I'll come back to our panelists to wrap up. And so students, I hope you've been using the chat for questions in that. So I do see something from Mayan. I'm not sure if that's the first question, but let's go ahead and just take Mayan's question. So how do you build an identifiable culture within your team and organization? You all work with people from different walks of life, ages, and different personal interests. How are you able to internally build a cohesive team that's able to work towards long-term goals, especially when it comes to the Olympics? Anybody want to tackle that question?
I can tackle part of that question.
Sure.
That's a great question. I mean, that's probably one of the key focus and challenges, you know, building your team culture. So I'll say that one of the ways to achieve that, and that's not just with the Olympics or not, is transparency, right? Is everybody knowing what their you know, what's expected of them, what their role is supposed to be, you know, especially with the Olympic Games and the Paralympics. You know, there is a lot of compartmentalism in the early part of what you always hear Olympic people talk the quad, you know, the 4 years leading up to whatever that games is. You know, and there's a lot of compartmentalism in the early years because there are things that need to happen right before you can get to the next stage of preparing the games and whatnot. And there are a lot of moving parts. So I think transparency and communication are two really important things to keep in mind when you're building your team culture. And then I think there's also a bit of there's you know, trust, but trust is earned. Right, it's not just easily, you know, handed out. And I think allowing people to experience firsthand, you know, and do things firsthand, and not being so, you know, much of a micromanager or control, you know, trying to control every situation. Of course, somebody's got to be in control, right? But allowing people to actually get a little bit of hands-on, you know, first-person experience can help build that trust. It can help, you know, not only gives hands-on experience, it gives a bit of an opportunity to evaluate, like, oh, what are the strengths and weaknesses, you know, of this member of the team, and how can you best put that to use? Check your ego at the door. You know, I mean, athletes can sometimes have very healthy egos and such, but I mean, when you're working behind the scenes, like I think a couple of us have, you know, referred to, like, yeah, if you have to pick up that 20-pound bag of ice, pick it up, right? Because nobody else is going to pick it up, and it's going to melt in the sun if you don't do it yourself, right? So be willing to put yourself, like, I never, you know, I was always asked to do weird things, and I never thought anything of it, you know, and I would not necessarily just ask people to do weird. I would never ask anybody to do something I wouldn't be willing to do myself, right? Pick up trash, you know, be a volunteer. I mean, if you run out of volunteers, you don't have enough, step in, right? And I've done that. So all of us have, I see heads like nodding, all of us have had to do that. So in terms of building your team culture, you know, put it all out there. This is what I expect. This is what we need to accomplish. And what can you bring to the table, team, you know, that will allow us to reach that goal.
Good stuff. And let's take another question if I can. So this one, I think in some senses you all may have already answered, but let me see if I can actually combine a couple questions. So one of our students, Fiona, was asking, as a student, what are some ways to be involved in action in Olympic sports? And let's see. Yeah, so someone could tackle, what are some ways to be involved in action in Olympic sports? I think you touched on it a little bit, but feel free to reinforce or expand.
If I can add one more thing as a way to get involved that I would bet on me to not mention is the youth sport component of the Olympic and Paralympic movement and action sports. Youth sports in the national governing body space, like USA Water Polo, we are also responsible for growing our particular sport within the United States. So if you can get involved in that component, because there's no Olympic Games if we don't, progress athletes to go and train them through the years and to go compete. So youth sports is very important and paramount to the success of the Olympic and Paralympic movement, especially in the United States, where we're not government supported financially. So, there's ways such as grassroots events, coaching, administration with clubs, club management. Those are some initial ways that you can do while you're in college and continue to rise from there. So I just wanted to mention youth sports as a way, because that's a big pipeline for us.
Great stuff. So we're almost at time, and I hate that because we're having such a great conversation here, but I wanted to wrap it up with just a bit of advice and some words of inspiration for our panelists. But I want to say something too. We're going to have a panel later on about finding your niche in sports. And I feel that what you all have offered already has been a nice setup for that panel. So thank you so much for sharing to give our students an opportunity to really broaden their perspectives on how to connect to the world of sports. So, so I want to ask if you all could just give some parting words of advice. And we're about trying to inspire students in this conference. So if you want to maybe toss in some inspiration, I would very much love that. So who wants to kick that off?
I think just being patient. I mean, it's definitely a super competitive, place to break into. And I find myself looking for a role now for the first time in my career, and I've had to exercise some patience as well. So I think, staying true to what you want to do, and it'll come if you're patient.
Well, thank you, Amy.
One thing that served me really well is seeking and cultivate sponsors. And sponsors to me are different than mentors. Mentors, they're there for coaching and advice, but a sponsor is someone who's going to pull you through to your next opportunity. And as I look at my career, I've had 6 sponsors who pulled me up to the next opportunity and challenged me to do things I've never thought I was going to be able to do. And it served me well. So being open to those opportunities and to cultivate that opportunity for yourself.
Terrific. Thank you, Emily.
Yeah, and it's funny, Emily, I use the same thing. That's one of my biggest probably pieces of advice, is to find a sponsor. Even when you do find that job, finding a sponsor internally in your corporation, someone who's going to advocate for you, because a mentor will help guide, but again, you want someone also advocating and speaking about you and putting you in rooms with opportunities. So, and again, a lot of it is patience as well, Amy. I mean, it is a challenging time, just as we all are, coming up to our year anniversary of this global pandemic. It will turn around. The tide will turn. And I think at this moment, what for me as a person within the action sports industry and working for IMG, I love meeting and doing informational interviews. So I think, as we all alluded to at the beginning, there are various ways to get into the action sports and Olympic, industry. And sometimes you don't know what the roles are. Ask for as many informational interviews as you can, and you'll be surprised. There are many of us executives that are willing to do informational interviews, myself included, just to share what we do, because I stumbled upon my job at IMG. I came from another agency, CAA, before coming here. And at the end of the day, would I have ever imagined that I'd be working in action sports for 20 plus years? I didn't even think about it. I didn't even realize that opportunity was there. So again, I think just, tapping people's shoulders, getting on LinkedIn, asking for informational interviews, and just understanding what each executive does or what their role within the sports industry is going to help you navigate.
Very nice, Jen. And thank you for putting that plug in for informational interviews and for extending that invitation. So I really appreciate that. All right. So ladies, who else wants to chime in and some parting words of advice and inspiration?
I can add, the importance of continuing to learn and grow and understand what's going on in the industry as a total. Any new job that I've ever taken, the first day, I'm like, what's the login to the Sports Business Journal? So, so I can do my daily readings. But that's so important because you can take what's going on in the NFL and apply it to something you want to do, or or you can see what your colleagues are doing, but just be knowledgeable about what's going on in the industry as a total, because that's so important for your personal growth within your role.
I think that's so true. I mean, action sports is all about the spirit of progression. And as much as the sports are progressing quickly, you want to ensure that you yourself are progressing in your career.
Very cool.
Ron, I think one thing I would add in closing is volunteer, and not just, to work events, but volunteerism is also about, finding an organization, especially like a youth sport organization you're passionate about, and volunteer some time, serve on a board, learn about sport governance. I think, for me, I spent 7 years on the board of USA Volleyball, and 5 of those years was as board chair. And I probably worked harder in that position than in any other paid position I've ever had in my entire life. But it also allows you to really get some important experience, and find like-minded people, right, in your industry, in your world. But volunteerism is huge, right, in any industry that you're going to be in. And then also, volunteer or participate in events like this, right? No joke. I mean, it's a great opportunity to see, and potentially find your sponsor, your mentor, and your colleagues, right? So a lot of folks that are on this call today or on the Zoom today, as far as being attendees, eventually you're going to be all of us sitting on this panel, right? That's where we all started, right? Going to these symposiums. Of course, they didn't look like this, but these opportunities are great ones to find, your colleagues, your people, right? And your eventually in the future, your resources, your team. So.
Great stuff, Lori. And Nancy, did we hear from you by any chance? I want to make sure we're missing anybody.
I'll add something really quick. Especially in terms of, entry-level jobs and how you can kind of excel there. I think not overlooking any task, like not begrudging a task because it's tedious, because really, like, when you dive into it and kind of take pride in it and see the nuance in any of those tasks, they become the fundamentals to making the grand things happen. And so often, like when we need to, be all doing so much work with a small team, the things that we hand off, we notice the people who can take what we said and understand what we actually need or what's needed 3 steps down the road, and start turning those things into kind of much more comprehensive answers versus just doing, the task in front of them. And that also really, really helps, I think, us start thinking, especially when you're coming in and learning a lot of things, thinking about things differently and seeing the bigger picture. So I think that's important as well.
Thanks, Caitlin. And Nancy, did we get you by any chance?
Yes.
Oh, you did.
For education, yes.
Okay, my apologies.
No worries.
I'm multitasking here. I'm trying to put some great stuff in the chat so the students remember what you're sharing too. And ladies, before we end, if you could stay on for a few minutes, if you want to answer any questions that the students have in the chat, I would much appreciate it. If you need to go, obviously, but I would love to get some of these questions answered. So, wow, a great way to start off our conference. And I just wanted to read something here from one of our student ambassadors. I need to find this real quick because she shared something really cool. But it's from Layla Messian. She said, I've never felt so empowered and uplifted after listening to a panel. Wow. So ladies, kudos to you for doing such a fantastic job of inspiring, empowering our students as we're hoping, and for getting this conference off to a great start. So definitely look forward to staying in touch. And yes, if you're able to hang around for a few moments and answer some of these questions in the chat, it'd be much appreciated. Okay, thank you and take care.